Test, test, 1, 2, test, test, 1, 2. Test, test. Okay, that did actually work. Sorry for the late. Sorry for the late start, everyone. Okay, I'm not repeating my ear anymore. Okay, sorry for the late start, everyone. I was cooking dinner and it got a little out of hand. It took me longer to clean up after. So, yeah, I'm starting a little later than I meant to. Right. Today we will be doing chapter 9 of A Nanite in a Fantasy. For those of you who don't know, Nanite in a Fantasy for Class Tanker and The Last Guardian, as well as Seed in the Void, all take place in the same universe, but not the same world. In fact, several events take place at the same time. However, it's a bit complicated, and I need to get the timeline fully hammered out. There will eventually be some crossover, but probably not until book 2 of The Last Guardian, maybe 3. Alright, give me a second. I'm trying to get something set up, and we'll get started. Just need a minute more. Alright, let's get started. The following week was a blur of activity and more than a few headaches for Gray. Just double checking his name spelling. Most of his remaining riders, i.e. the small selection of centaurs and two of the evacuation wagons were sent out with courier notices. Sent to the or the two centaurs he had. Adventures he had left. Had been sent to the nearest settlement with a communication lacrima multiple times over the next few days. They weren't too particularly happy with him, but he promised them quite a payday when all was said and done. So he doubted they'd be ditching him before they got their money. And he was right about Command being very interested in her capabilities. Sam's capabilities. They had a lot of weapons that were beyond salvaging, and it took time to melt them down and process them into useful materials. Heck, a lot of the undead's equipment was rusted beyond salvage, and would either have to be thrown away or melted down. And while they weren't willing to put Unfortunately, the higher-ups weren't willing to put in. Unfortunately, the higher-ups weren't willing to put in an exceptional amount of effort to get these to him and Sam. Though they did put in requests for them to be set aside and for quartermasters to try and pass them along with the various shipments. Once they reached the nearby settlements, they would actually be packed up as full shipments, along with the excess metal that could be provided. Though he knew he'd have to make an agreement with Sam to allow her to salvage some of what they sent. Brought her, both for repairs and for her payment. Whoops. I sneezed, or was having a sneezing fit, and forgot to unmute my microphone afterwards. The first shipment was arriving later today. Though Sam had worried that they were overestimating. Were overestimating estimating what she would be able to process and how quickly. Though she did state with time she could likely increase that speed. But again, it would take time. And resources that she simply didn't have. And we agreed not to overtax her. We would let her work at her own pace, and anything she could provide would help us out tremendously. especially as it would be a while before we truly attempted anything industrial. Our goal was to eventually convert her valley into a forward operation post. So setting up proper forges to take the load off her was on the table. Especially if we could upscale or help her establish the larger industrial industrialization she is attempting. All in all, it would. Both the higher-ups and Gray agreed. Both the higher-ups and Gray agreed that helping her establish herself more was only beneficial for them. Especially if turning a blind eye to this whole mess ended in her death. We didn't quite know if she truly was the last of her kind or what had happened. But no one wanted to risk the penalties for causing an extinction. even an accidental one. Kingdoms had been blighted just for wiping out a flower before. And no one had been dumb enough to try it with a sentient race. So, as things stood, she was too valuable an asset to leave unsupervised. To help things along, I had the blacksmith feed any damaged equipment that he thought Sam could repair in the camp to her, along with any scrap metal he could get his hands on. He wasn't too pleased at that, as well. We had two dwarven blacksmiths here for a reason. Blacksmiths for a reason. But best to help their minuscule friend along. Another thing they had started doing was helping her hunt the undead in the valley. Normally, what was done was fallback points were decided upon, and squads would go out, hunt, and then haul the bodies back to the fallback points to burn them, as it was the easiest way to get rid of them without having to destroy the bodies. Now, the hunters were followed by her flying machines that would drop slimes. The strange silvery slime-like things Sam used onto the bodies to devour them. A few of his adventures were uncomfortable, helping it devour corpses, humanoid or other race. From the of similar races to their own, but they couldn't afford to lay the bodies back to rest properly. If priestly rites could not be given, the souls not exorcised, it was better to destroy the bodies so they could not be used again, and their souls would be forced passed on. This was just another way to destroy the body. Plus, from what I understood, she wasn't actually eating the corpses. Instead, she was breaking them down into their base elements. So, it was not that hard to sell. Most of them that it was more corpse disposal by alchemy than it was feeding it to a monster. Still, several refused to go out and hunt with her because of it. Regardless, it was sort of progress. We still couldn't. But they definitely weren't. Regardless, it was still going to be a while before anyone other than Sam could get into that forest of hers. Though the truest the strangest shock came half a week later when some idiot thought to feed his broken magical sword into Sam's fountain for repairs. She couldn't fix it. She didn't have the understanding of magic to do so. But completely but the magic crystal within caused her to completely shut down. Completely go completely silent for almost 3 days. Apologies. That was a lot more than I was expecting. I could only do so much in my current state at the time. Analyzing that crystal took a lot of my focus, and I couldn't avoid defending the valley, so I had to limit myself for a while. I think I need more of these mana crystals. I might, keyword, might be able to make things that can help with them. I couldn't fully analyze it with that one crystal. But their surprising properties. Are similar to crystals I found previously, but far more complex and far more useful. How useful are we talking? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what they're barking at. I don't know if you can hear that, but the dog outside is barking. Not my Rusty, the other dog. It looks like one of my neighbor's dogs got out. about here. That's a low-grade nanocrystal. I'm not surprised you haven't found one yet. They usually only drop from monsters. And from what I've seen around here, the only true monsters you encounter are mana-evolved animals, goblins, and the undead. All notable for having low drop rates. Most likely, if what Catherine... Was that the name I gave her? Hold on. Molly. I really need to sit down and update the tags. Whoops. Should have done that. Should not have done that. Molly told us about your valley. Forest is true. You most likely have only had access to nature crystals, correct? Curiously, while nature crystals weren't an exceptionally valuable artifact, as it was only of real value to nature magic practitioners, it was still a useful reagent. Likely so, yes. Though there aren't many left. I've been using them as emergency energy reserves for my various machines. Though they break down rather quickly. Ah. Well, monocrystals crystals tend to form as a form of internal magic reserve or foci for creatures, or in the case of mages, people who use a lot of magic. Simple animals tend not to have the intelligence to use magic. Undead, unless they are exceptionally high level or are explicitly made, specially made to do so, rarely have the capabilities to use magic, even if the their original body made from a magic user. Goblins likely would have been your best source of them, but usually they have to get further along. Pretty far along to develop magic users. Anyways, I digress. Getting them isn't that hard. Even the quality ones. We typically use them as power sources for enchantments or magical artifacts. Wands tend to have one as a focus. Magical weapons, like that sword, typically use them to imbue effects. Or to store mana, or if the craftsman is efficient enough to manage it, to store mana for future use. We can even use them to get clean drinking water, and in situations where lighting fires isn't particularly dis- disadvantageous. We use it to cook. Some have elemental affinities, I should clarify. I believe that one you consumed was fire-based in origin. I see. I see. I see. That would explain why I couldn't fully analyze it. I was focusing more on the material it could be used for, not its characteristics. And even then, I didn't get a full understanding of it. Best case scenario, I might be able to stop them from what I was able to learn. I might be able to recharge them for use. I might be able to make power sources to extend the range of my various hives. But one of the most advantageous, I might be able to make a purifier capable of absorbing various energies from the surrounding atmosphere, including the energies that allow the undead to resurrect their fallen comrades. Well, I don't know if it could stop them. I could definitely slow it down in an area. In exchange, it would also charge magic crystals. Charge the magic crystals used in the process. but I don't know any of this for sure. I need to run some experiments, as well as have a full understanding of the crystals to make use of them. I can begin work on a rather small scale prototype, but I do not believe I can replicate the crystals as I stand. My abilities to my drone's ability to work with various materials is not to the scale needed to even begin attempting replicating or growing those crystals. I would need to establish a functional process first, and I don't even know where to begin on that, in all honesty. It would take a lot of time and research to figure that out, but I believe I can at least work with the crystals once provided. How many do you need for your testing? Gray said, Gray all but shouted, all but shouted at Sam if she truly could find a way to cleanse the necromantic. Necromantic energy. Energies that were blighting the land, slowing the rise of the dead, and charging crystals on top of that? It would be a huge boon to the following war effort. Even if it could only slow down their resurrections, it would buy more time for cleanup on battlefield. The cleanup cleansing the battlefield. And help keep their numbers in check. Rough estimate, and I do mean exceptionally rough estimate here. at the bare minimum, I need 6 to convert into the needed components, another 2 to complete the research, and likely I'll need one of every elemental type if possible. Though I could probably get away with not researching every elemental type for just the purifier. But anything more advanced, I definitely need to have a better understanding of the various elements involved. Affinities involved. Rusty. Rusty. No snore. No snore. No snore. No snore. So, rough estimate at the very least, I could probably get away with 8, maybe 10 crystals. And again, that would just be to make a small prototype, proof of concept. To start, an actual functioning unit will probably take a lot more. Gray sighed but nodded. Not the cheap wonder weapon I was hoping for, but at the very least, it'd likely help a city. The cities and fortresses with their defense. I should be able to gather up that many. At the very least. As for more, that'll have to come out of my own coffers. Most likely. I'll see what I can do. One month and almost half the valley conquered later, with the help of Sam's growing number of creatures and Gray's slow trickle of fresh adventurers, they were beginning to set up fortifications to establish a full beachhead in front of the valley, cutting it off from the undead horde, at least on this side. Sam finally finished the first prototype. It was a bigger, flying unit, one that was capable of carrying one of the one that was individually capable of carrying one of her dog-like units, though those were still few and far between. They did offer whatever assistance they could, acting as an extra hand wherever needed. As a first test, it flew over a battle a group of undead. Small greenish purple motes floated out of the corpses and into the 6 small collectors on the bottom. Another 5 donated drained crystals from Gray's own communication artifacts glowed on top of it as they charged. The effect was as they noticeable. The undead slowing down or even beginning to fall apart. One they were even able to pin down using some form of vine magic. Began to break apart after about 20 minutes, and according to Sam, likely would have died if she hadn't completely filled all the crystals. The crystals had to be placed in small glass containers with little wire-like claws holding it in place. Bit odd, but it worked shockingly well, and saved Gray the trouble of having to refresh all of his artifacts. So often. Though this was a step too far for Gray's higher-ups to truly believe, as an higher-ranking noble was to be dispatched to prove the claims involved. But regardless, but if she could, truly scale up the design and cleanse more area, territory, it would be exceptionally useful. Meanwhile, Sophia, Sam, was busy elsewhere. The former Goblin Cave was coming along somewhat. Iron. Iron was grounded down and then poured into a crucible. before being poured and cooled. Before being poured and cooled. Well, I would likely have to come up with some form of mold system soon. It was easier to reshape and reuse the processed metal. At the moment. Allowing me to make the parts for my aerial drones and spot units far easier. As well as setting up several very basic mechanical assembly lines, where once the parts were made, they could be assembled. It was actually a little slower than cold forging it with nanites. Printing it with just the nanites, but required far less energy, processing power, and, well, nanites to get the job done. Essentially, the crucible spat out blobs of iron. They were cooled, fed to a small pool of nanites that then spat out parts that were then piled into a small assembly line that would work on whatever was needed as soon as the parts were made. Slower by far, but considering she had 6 of these set up already, valuable. The research on the various things the crystals could do was coming along rather nicely. One of her biggest issues was batteries. At first, a typical chemical battery was what they had used they didn't have and while she could make them easy enough, they had a relatively short lifespan and very short battery life. She had been working her way up to lithium batteries, but she was missing a few elements. But the crystals, well, a single one of them could act as a battery, easy enough. Not only did it last longer, but it would actually grow stronger with time. If put in the power cell format she was currently using to charge them, over time it would begin to grow, filling up the empty space within the cell. The most interesting part was the data inside each crystal. Wasn't quite like computer data. If she had to guess, it was basically the magical instructions for skills she had seen Sam had watched enough adventurers at this point use their skills. Use their skills to know that that was a thing, as well as some form of system interface was also a thing. They vaguely remembered something about that from their reincarnation process, but that was a while ago, so they weren't fully sure. If they could figure out how to make these crystals and gathered enough data
from them, they might even be able to access this system as well. And that was the most interesting topic of research. But it had a lot of question marks before it could even begin to be fulfilled on the research menu. Research menu had some ability to point them in the right direction of whatever they needed to do to actually research it. A topic with its description, but it was more often than not just a set of question marks in the require box that in the requirement box. But it was a starting point, at least. And with that, I think we'll call it here for tonight. I hope you all enjoyed, and this will be up on Patreon in a few... Actually, I don't know when this will be up on the Patreon, but whenever I can get it edited. Till then, this is Wrecker, signing off.